In this lesson, we're going to continue to talk about some of the core ideas of liberalism, focusing on the idea of economic policy, looking at how liberal economics actually operates and some of the fundamental philosophical ideas that informs the economic policies of liberal thinkers. So we're going to focus quite broadly on economic policies. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of policy in this lesson when we talk about liberalism, because essentially we're going to do that when we look at different varieties of liberalism in the future in relation to economics. We're going to talk about broad policies. We're going to talk about the sort of broad prescriptions about what an economy ought to do, what an economy is meant to do within a liberal conception of the state or within a liberal conception of society, which is a slightly different kind of question, because we're talking about what economic policies are commonly described as being part of the broader corpus of liberalism, under the broader umbrella of liberalism. So this is informed by the already talked about issues that we've focused on in previous lessons. It's informed by our understanding of human nature and our understanding of society. And we noted in previous lessons that human nature is fundamentally individualistic. It is fundamentally egotistically individualistic in the sense that humans act in their own best interests, but it also is informed by this idea that we have innate natural rights and natural liberties that exists separate to the idea or the existence of the state. Human rights and human liberties that are natural rights and natural liberties do not come from the state. They come from our innate human nature. And so as a result of which they can exist without the existence of the state. Hence why we see that liberals have a more optimistic understanding of life without the state of nature. Because liberals believe that property is one of the fundamental natural rights that we can describe, a liberal economic policy will have private property as being very central to their reasoning and their understanding. And this is really where we see a lot of the delineations between a liberal and, for example, a socialist understanding of economics. The idea within liberalism is that private property is very key and very fundamental. And so as a result of this, a liberal will generally support a type of capitalism. Capitalism which also allows for the existence of and the ownership of private property. So when we think about liberalism in terms of economic policy, we will note that liberalism has strongly been associated with principles of private enterprise as well as private ownership of property, different kinds of property, but also in terms of real property, things like land, for example. So with this all being said, one can describe the concept of capitalism as being one of the ideas of economic liberalism. And what this does is it sets apart liberalism from socialism, since one of the core tenets of socialist theory is a critique of capitalism and an overall rejection of capitalist economics and capitalist ideas, because of the fact that socialists want to overthrow capitalism fundamentally. Whether or not they believe that can be done through revolution or whether that is done through political reform is a different debate to be had within socialism. But it is fundamental that socialists are anti-capitalist in their outlook. Now, in making a case for the existence of what becomes known as free markets, the idea of the ability for people to buy and sell goods, which is essentially what a market is, outside of the control of the government or intervention from the state, the economist and founding thinker of capitalist economics, Adam Smith, argues that if obstacles to free trade are removed, then what he coins the invisible hand of the markets will force and guide traders to success. What does this mean? Well, a market in economics is simply any place, location, whether that be ethereal in terms of an online market or physical in terms of a marketplace, where people buy and sell goods and services. Now, according to Adam Smith, if you take away any obstacles to that, if you remove any law or regulation which imposes restrictions on any market, you have what is known as a free market, a market that can just do what it wants to do. And when you do that, there are certain laws and rules within economics which are followed by the free market. And this is what Adam Smith coins the invisible hand of the market. These are things like the laws of supply and demand. Essentially, the demand for an item, or also price and demand as well. So the demand for an item will increase if the price of the good decreases. That's just a very classic understanding of a basic market economic principle. And these kinds of rules will ultimately guide the people who are trading within a market to success. Now, there are lots of other ways in which liberal economics may be represented. Capitalism exists in a number of different forms. Adam Smith, for example, advocated for what becomes known in the future as supply-side economics, or trickle-down system of economics. The result of this is reducing quantitative restrictions on trade and leads to wealth being naturally trickled down through the rest of society. The way supply-side economics operated in, for example, the 1980s in the United States under the Reagan administration was essentially the idea that if we cut taxation as much as possible for the richest within society, then that means that they will have more money to own and to do what they want with, and that money would then be spent in the economy by these wealthy individuals, and that wealth would eventually trickle down to the rest of society and ultimately allow for the rest of society to become enriched. So by cutting taxation, you improve the state of the rest of the economy. That is one idea relating to liberal capitalist economics. Equally, a liberal economic policy could also advocate for the existence of markets, but also ensure that there is restrictions on these markets, that there are rules in place, and that these rules in place ensure something known as distributive justice, which allows for, or essentially does not allow for, the accumulation of wealth into the hands of very few individuals, but rather distributes wealth in a more just way to allow for people to essentially be able to benefit from the market as well. An example of how distributive justice could be achieved is through the instantiation of a strong welfare state. So, for example, if we increase taxation for the richest in society, and then we use that tax as a state to create welfare programs to allow for free education, free healthcare, free support for people who are struggling, then that would essentially take the money from the richest in society through tax and then distribute that through welfare and create what is known as distributive justice. This is something that would not allow for the existence of a free market, because you're essentially imposing restrictions on certain elements of the free market capitalist state to ensure that there is a more equal distribution of justice across the entire economy.